Yeah. Well, it's really it's to the point that we started off with, and that was a relationship between intellectual empathy on the one hand and fair-mindedness on the other. They're closely intertwined, because if I'm going to be intellectually empathetic to your point of view, I have to be focused. I have to be attentive to your point of view and be very focused on being fair-minded to your point of view. I can't undermine you in any way at all. So that's a relationship between intellectual empathy and fair-mindedness. But they also go in somewhat different but complementary directions as well. Because so here's an example. I read a book about Radovan Karadzic. It's called My War Criminal. He's the person who engineered the genocide in Bosnia, and he's on trial in the Hague, and this reporter got permission to interview him. She calls him My War Criminal. And when I was reading about it on Amazon, I mean, she says, I went in there to try to put across his point of view, to portray the point of view of this mass murderer. When I went on Amazon, I saw all these negative reviews saying, she's just saying his point of view. I mean, this is terrible. She should be giving the other side. And I thought, wow, that's a book I want to read for intellectual empathy, because it takes quite a bit of restraint to hold yourself to just presenting the point of view of this person you despise and abhor. Okay, so the book actually wasn't very good, because she put herself not just intellectually empathetically, but empathetically very much in his point of view. So I don't want to talk about the book, but one of the dangers of empathy is that you can immerse yourself in the point of view of repulsive people, or you can immerse yourself in repulsive points of view. That is, I'm trying to think the way this mass murderer thinks, and that can bring feelings along with it. It can start leaning you toward being empathetic to that person's goals and desires and all. And a good safety measure is fair-mindedness. It puts a kind of brake, like putting on the brakes, with regard to intellectual empathy going into empathy. So when I'm considering intellectual empathy with someone like this mass murderer, I'm putting myself in his point of view and seeing how he thinks about Bosnians and how he thinks about his own country and the people in the country, putting myself in that point of view. When I think about fair-mindedness, it's not just fair-mindedness toward Karadzic, to the mass murderer, it's fair-mindedness with respect to everyone else. So that means after I've done my work of being intellectually empathetic with his point of view, I now remove myself from that, think of the larger context, and then I can condemn him wholeheartedly through fair-mindedness to the people who were killed by him. So notice that, to me, that means that fair-mindedness and intellectual empathy often go hand in hand, but oftentimes they're complementary to one another. They serve different ends. They're not the same thing.
And I was going to just point out that, now, to me, when we add the term intellectual to empathy,
right,
then that should put the brakes on.
Right, it should.
But it's fair-mindedness is is a reminder that we've got to consider all the relevant viewpoints. And that includes our own viewpoint equally. Yeah. But now I want to say that I can easily see, as you have described, this interrelationship between intellectual empathy and fair-mindedness. And it makes perfect sense to say, I have to be able to enter in good faith viewpoints. I have to be skilled at that, and I have to have a propensity towards that. And that's a propensity. Then fair-mindedness means that where other viewpoints are relevant, or where any viewpoints are relevant, those have to be considered.
Indeed, yes, yeah.
And I just want to point out that in our primary textbook and book for professionals and for personal life, we place fair-mindedness as the organizer for all of the intellectual virtues.
Yeah, right. Yes.
And there's so many interrelationships between intellectual virtues. We don't want to, as it were, give one all the credit, so to speak.
Right.
But fair-mindedness is central to, obviously, the thinking critically, because if you don't have that dimension, then you're going to be thinking sophistically. And so fair-mindedness is an organizer for our work and for our approach.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that critical thinking is still being taught in this way that doesn't necessarily entail the ethical dimension.
Yeah,
but
means to an end.
Right. Yeah, it's
the goal. How do you get to the goal? Right.
But you can't have critical thinking properly so-called without the ethical dimension. So
yeah,
there isn't a reasonable argument to leave out the ethical dimension. It's like saying, let's just leave out the ethical dimension of life. Well, that's what we've tried to do. And that's why we've gotten into trouble. So we need to realize that there is an ethical dimension. It runs through human life, and we have to understand there is an ethical dimension. We have to work out what that is in every circumstance.